Liberia, West Africa. One of the most brutal wars this region had seen ended just 5 years ago. Hundreds of thousands of people suffered. Men, women, the old and the young. Killed, maimed, traumatized. But there were also great survivors molded from this crisis, and new leaders were born. This week on African Voices, Liberian youth activist Kimmie Weeks.
Going through the war and having that experience firsthand of nearly dying essentially made me a stronger person.
Kimmie Weeks was born before the Liberian War began, in the capital, Monrovia. But at the age of 9, the war came to the child like it did to so many Liberians. Kimmie Weeks showed us the house his family were forced to escape to during the fighting.
I was 9 when it first started, so it was just a complete turnaround from life as usual to being in the middle of a war that we had never seen or expected to be that bad.
So you ran away to here?
Yes, my mom and I came to this place. This was the safest place. I mean, we had walked the entire day to get here.
Yeah.
And when we got here, there were already thousands of people who had gathered.
If you were not able to hide, what would happen to you?
Well, you'd be killed. And that was one of the reasons. I mean, even when we were coming, the road that we traveled on, that was littered with dead bodies because it was as if every 5 minutes the rebel had a checkpoint. And at each checkpoint you got there, they would ask you questions, and if you were unfortunate, you'd get carried behind a hut or shot. And so hundreds of people.
And how old
died
were these
along the
rebels?
way. Oh, I mean, you had people who were 10, 9, 15. The youngest person who was disarmed was 6 years old. We like to think about it now as it's in the past, that hopefully we've moved beyond that we'll never be back in a situation where there's child soldiers, where there's killings and rapings and looting and stuff like that. So that's the hope that we have for Liberia.
5 years after the war, the abandoned house he hid in as a child is still there.
There were so many people dying, they stopped burying people. So when we would come out in the evening, you could just see as the piles of bodies were growing in the distance because they were just throwing bodies.
Who was throwing the bodies? The families?
People, yeah, exactly. You know, if someone died, you just basically threw them out, threw their bodies out. My mom had gone to school in the U.S. She had studied fashion designing at FIT in New York. So I don't think she ever had imagined, and most people in this room would never have imagined that there would be a point when they'll be in that situation where she couldn't feed me, where people were going to the toilet on themselves, watching their children die, newborn babies die and stuff like that. And while we were here, I got 3 of the epidemics that were going. The cholera, which just everybody was getting, and yellow fever. It just makes your skin, your eyes yellow, bright yellow. I mean, literally yellow. It's a scare, like a yellow T-shirt. And so there was a long time when I was sort of just drifting in and out of consciousness. I was laying on the floor, and I would just wake up and see my mom. And, she would always be sitting next to me and have a reassuring smile, essentially. But there was a point where that had gone on for a long time, and I stopped waking up. And so people in the room started to get concerned because obviously they were used to seeing me getting up. Most evenings when we didn't have food, it would just be hot water we drank. So you drink that just so you felt like you had something in your stomach. And so people were used to seeing me getting up. And they weren't seeing me getting up, so they started to get concerned, and they kept asking, her, what's going on with Kimmie? And she kept saying, he's fine, don't worry. And she kept, trying to put them off. And essentially at some point they just didn't believe it anymore, and 2 of the men came in who were in the room, held her. There was another person who wasn't even a medical doctor, but this person felt my pulse, and they said, he's dead. And so right there, the cloth we were laying on, they wrapped me up in that cloth and basically took me out and dumped me in the bodies. And then eventually let my mom go. And she ran out, and people thought she had lost her mind because she was just going through dead bodies, crawling through dead bodies until she found me. And that was a month into being here, and we stayed here for 6 months. Those were probably the hardest 6 months of the war. And that was the night that when they brought me back in and she told me what had happened, that I made the vow and the commitment. It was more a promise to God that if I survived the war, my life would be dedicated to making sure that no child went through what I went through.
Kimmie Weeks saw the worst of the war as a child, and children were among both combatants and victims. In 1998, he published a report about the use of child soldiers, and soon after this, he went to the United States for his own safety. Liberia's president at the time, Charles Taylor, remains accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in neighboring Sierra Leone's conflict. He has denied recruiting child soldiers there or in Liberia.
Charles Taylor is saying there were no such thing as child soldiers.
Oh, that's not true. He knows it's not true. Everybody knows it's not true. There's images of it. We all saw child soldiers, children who were fighting. To say that children never fought in the war, nothing could be further from the truth. I know friends who fought in the war who were forced to fight, and that's the key thing. That there are lots of kids who were just forcibly taken from their families, forcibly taken from their homes, and forced to fight. And one of the largest initiatives I did in Liberia was called the Children's Disarmament Campaign. And this was in 1996. And what we said was, if we can't end the entire war, at least let's get the guns away from the children. And we started going to the various rebel groups and talking to rebel commanders and trying to convince them. It was massive. It was the first time that children across the country, usually you had university students doing political action. But we were able to rally elementary schools, high schools across the country. Children started to demonstrate for peace, protest for peace.
How old were you?
See, this was when I was 15, when the campaign was happening, 15 turning 16. And so we had, sometimes they would sit us down, and essentially they would say, sit on the ground and open your legs, and then the guy would stand in one end and start to shoot. So he would shoot from here all the way until you see the bullets coming to you, and they come up to you. Exactly. I mean, and that it was a very, very scary, and those were scary experiences. But yeah, children did fight. We did, and a big part of my work, the initial part of it, was getting those children out of the armies and into schools.
With the end of the war, Kimmie Weeks went about the business of following his calling to save Liberia's children. And his activism goes beyond Liberia's traumatized young. Women suffered horrendously.
It's one of those most unfortunate facts of reality that in a country that's experienced so much war, rape is still one of the biggest issues.
Kimmie Weeks is now establishing women's empowerment organizations.
You made so much sacrifice to be here today. I see a lot more smiling faces. I remember the first time I came, there were angry faces.
Projects began by his Youth Action International have been empowering former child soldiers in Sierra Leone, Uganda and Liberia, and educating war survivors in literacy and how to run their own businesses.
If Kimmie Weeks is now available to be a part of a team that's moving the country forward, we will welcome him with open arms, because he has done well for the country. He's done well for the youth of the world, and we recognize that when we made him our orator. He was the first youthful orator at our Independence Day celebration 2 years ago, and he's been working, opening some centers that has been helping some of our young women, empowering them to be able to acquire the skills and be able to have income generation activities. So he's one of the young people that we certainly applaud.
I didn't expect this, my first time in Liberia. What's going on here?
Well, most people don't expect it, because when they think about Liberia, they think about war, bloodsheds, cannibalism, all that kind of stuff. But in truth, the country has immense beauty. I mean, it's going to be a tourist hotspot soon. I mean, you look in the distance and you already see people surfing. And we've only been 3 years with the new government. Imagine what will happen 5, 10 years down the road.
Coming up, we talk to Kimmie Weeks about the uneasy alliance between development and aid. Can Liberia survive without handouts?